Well, hello everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are today. And thank you for taking time today to attend an RKO webinar. Today we'll be showing the automation of accounts payable invoices using scanning, content management, and workflow technologies. So launching right into it, I think it's important to discuss why we're all here. In most organizations, there are significant inefficiencies in how incoming invoices are processed and paid, and the results of this study by Aberdeen Group still hold true today. When asked what organizations need in their AP departments above all else, a fair number needed to reduce payment errors and take better advantage of early payment discounts, or even just to pay invoices on time and avoid penalties. But far and away, many more organizations cited a need to improve overall processes, including visibility into the process, and more than anything else on the list, to reduce how much it costs to process an invoice. And it's easy to see why. Once separated into the top performers, the normals, and the laggards, a significant difference appears both in how much it costs to process an invoice and how long it takes to process an invoice. The top 20% save $32 per invoice versus the bottom 30% and manage to process their invoices in 32 fewer days. So by now you may be asking, who is RKO and how does this all relate? RKO's primary objective is to make elated end users of content-centric solutions, which includes accounts payable processing. We are entirely focused on enterprise content management, scanning, storage, workflow, records management, and have advanced partnerships with both IBM and Microsoft to provide these solutions. Now, as this slide builds out, we'll see a handful of our over 40 customers with whom we've run over 100 successful projects. Of all requests coming into RKO, AP solutions are second only to records management. So back to AP processes. For folks in the laggards and averages group, their AP process typically involves a number of manual steps and likely looks like this. An invoice or perhaps by mail, fax, or email. Prior to a better solution, many of the organizations we speak to receive invoices by email and then print them out. Although EDI may be used by some, it still represents only a quarter to a third of invoicing. The invoice data is keyed into an accounting or ERP system, and a validation of the PO details occurs, sometimes with an ERP. Depending on the systems in place, these two steps may occur together or in reverse order. It is not uncommon for some type of markup to occur on the paper copy, including writing account codes or other details. Now, typically some type of approval is required, perhaps only for an invoice to a certain amount or for some other business rules. In most cases, this works well, but vacations or busy periods can result in approvals falling through the cracks for a time. Ultimately, the invoice is approved and paid, filed away in a filing cabinet, or maybe multiple photocopies in multiple filing cabinets, where eventually it may be retrieved and ultimately locked in the bottom of somebody's desk drawer, never to be seen again. In essence, what we've got here are manual processes with manual data entry, cumbersome verification, stamps, signatures, and handwriting. It's inefficient and there's a high risk of errors along the way. And many of our clients come to us and say, it's 2012, there must be a better way to do this. To address the inefficiencies in the AP process, organizations seem to follow a fairly standard maturity model. The first approach, usually the status quo, is a paper-based process. In this process, there's no scanning. Invoices arrive as paper or perhaps email and then are printed out, as I discussed earlier. They're processed as paper and they're saved as paper. This way of handling invoices is expensive. There's a high personnel cost, there's filing, there's retrieval, there's storage costs for the paper. Quite often there's missed discounts or even penalties for late payments. And there's a very high potential for lost or documents. And above all else, it's slow. To address this, typically organizations will start with some type of approach through using an ERP. This usually starts with automating workflows in the ERP. This reduces variances in the process, but efficiency gains are really only slight. And sometimes these solutions include linking the digital copies to the ERP records, but typically this is done after the processing occurs. So the processing still occurs with the paper documents, but only after it's processed, it's scanned and linked into the ERP and available for those who are looking at the records after the fact. Where you start to get into the real efficiency gains is when you start to implement imaging and recognition. So In this case, what you do is you scan the invoice before processing. The digital copy is routed around, and the holy grail is when you use computer systems to do recognition off of the invoices, capturing the data and information off of the form and generating a real ROI in your investment, and this is where we can help. So EDI was invented years ago, and although electronic payments are quite frequent today, electronic invoicing is more common via email than anything like EDI. So the invoice is still a reality for today, even if it's arriving less by mail and fax and more by email. So what we want to do is target all the areas that can be automated and whose manual processes have excessive time or effort. Here, 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 and here. And we do this by providing automatic recognition of invoice data, automatic verification of that data, approval automation with exception processing, so humans are only involved where there's an exception that needs to be handled, not for just rote invoices that should be approved automatically. And we're going to use IBM Datacap Taskmaster, Microsoft SharePoint, and Nintex Workflow to make this all happen. So what will be today will be invoices arriving from different vendors, and these invoices will be in many forms. Some will be multi-page, and there will even be a new vendor invoice format that we've never seen before. We'll use Datacap, IBM Datacap, to do data recognition from these forms, to apply rules to that data validation, including a lookup to an external ERP system to validate some of the details of the PO. And we'll show fingerprinting, where we can handle new invoices which have never seen before and set them up for further recognition without having to involve IT in the process. After scanning and recognition, we'll run electronic invoice for approval using Nintex Workflow. This will simplify the approval process, grant greater visibility into where the process is, and allow for deadlines, escalations, and all the nice things that are done manually in a paper-based internal mail process. Finally, we'll show the invoice added to the SharePoint. Data from the invoice form will be added as searchable data so that you can get all the typical benefits of using an enterprise content management solution. The invoice will be easily viewed, easily searched, and can be filtered from a list. You can integrate those invoices into an ERP, allowing access where people work most frequently. You can have concurrent access, something not easily possible with paper forms, is disaster resistant, and furthermore, you can add additional capabilities such as records management or additional workflows. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Darren to run the software demonstration.
All right, thank you, Rob. So now that Rob explained the process and a little bit about how Datacap and SharePoint and the workflow works, let's take a look at the actual software and see what the end user experience is going to be like for our employees. So leading up to what I'm going to show you in the demo here is we dropped some invoices from a variety of vendors into our scanner. We scan those invoices in, and Datacap's gone ahead and done some processing on them. During the processing, as Rob talked about, we have a fingerprint database. So what the processing has done is, as it's looked at an invoice, it's determined if we have a fingerprint for it, and if we do, it's used that fingerprint to find information all over that invoice and automatically pull it into our Datacap system so we can use it. So let's take after it's done that, really the next step of the process is for someone to do some verification to ensure that those values are accurate. So that's what we'll take a look at now. So here's the verify step for Datacap, where again a user will look at the invoice and ensure all of the information or data Datacap has pulled out of it is accurate. So over on the left-hand side here we have our invoice, and you can see this is from XYZ Hardware. So it's one of the invoices that was scanned in. And then over on the right-hand side is all of the information that Datacap has automatically pulled off that invoice. And as you can see, none of this had to been typed in by any of our users. This was all automated and automatically filled in. Now, some of the really cool things that's going on here, I'm going to show you over on the right-hand side. So first of all, based on that fingerprint, Datacap has automatically looked up our vendor. So it said, oh, I know what an XYZ Hardware invoice looks like. It's gone over to our accounting system, our ERP system, pulled back the vendor name, and more importantly, or as important, the vendor number. So it's gone ahead and again pulled that from our accounting, our ERP system. Then what it's done is gone and pulled data from the invoice and into this screen. And how it's done that is it's actually using that ICR or OCR technology that Rob talked about, and it's that character recognition. And so on the top here is what we have is called a snippet. So what that is an area on the invoice where it's collecting that data. So here we can see the postal code 57501. It has automatically found that area of the XYZ hardware invoice and pulled back that information automatically for us. As well, it's automatically pulled back the invoice number from that snippet. Now the great thing about these snippets is the person doing this verification step, really their eyes only have to look in that one little area, and it's very easy for them to see if that value is correct. So I don't have to look over in the left-hand side or be looking at a piece of paper and then looking back at my screen. This is very user-friendly, and so that it can be done quickly and accurately by the people doing the verification step. Now, on that point, all of these fields that you see that are blue, Datacap is very sure that they are correct. So for the most part, the verifier can skip over all of those. And the areas that are yellow are the areas that Datacap is unsure of. So you can see down on the bottom here, I'm going to click on the cell that's yellow, and it has the value 1000-XX. Well, Datacap wasn't 100% sure on that. So what it's done is identified that to the verification operator that they might want to take a look at that and ensure it is correct. Now, in this case, that value actually is correct. So as a verifier, I do not have to do anything else to this invoice. I can go ahead and click Submit, and that'll get queued up for adding into our repository, our SharePoint repository. Then what Datacap does is move to the next problem or error in the batch that it's found. And in this case, this happens to be, again, an invoice from Yellow Insurance Agency. So again, it's looked up the vendor, the Yellow Insurance Agency. It's looked up its vendor number, again, from our back-end system. And it's done to figure out where the postal code. So in this case, the postal code is somewhere entirely different on this invoice. So again, based on those fingerprint technology, it knows where to look to pull up this information. Again, it was automatically handled by the system, and the user didn't need to key that. So I looked through all of my blue fields. It's quite confident with. Now, there's a red field here, so I'm going to click on this. This red field is one where a rule, a validation rule, has failed. So in this case, it actually was quite sure that this date was correct as far as it was read from the system. But what our validation rule said is there actually is not a 29th day of February in the year 2009. So as an operator, I can actually change that to a valid date, and now I can submit and go on. We can write rules around dates. It can do automatic tallying of values, such as the line item numbers, to ensure that they total up correctly. So there's a lot of powerful validation rules you can have in the system. All right, so my next invoice that's come up here is for busy car repair. Now, you can see over on the right-hand side, we don't actually have much of this data at all, because in the system there is no fingerprint. So how do we add a fingerprint? It's actually very easy and can be done on the fly. And this is one of the great powerful aspects of Datacap. So the first thing I need to do is tell it what vendor this invoice is from. So I'm going to click on this little vendor. And this is going to do a lookup into, again, into our accounting or ERP system. And we're going to say this is for busy car repair. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And you can see it's now got our vendor and our vendor number. And what I'm going to do is go through and fill out any of the other information that we need. So for invoice number, I'll just click on that field, and then I just tell Datacap where on this particular image to find that information. So I'm going to go over to the left-hand side here. You can see with my mouse, and I'm just going to click on that invoice number. And just like that, we have a snippet now, and it's read the data from it, and it's blue, so it thinks it's accurate. So the other one, the next field is invoice date. Now it kind of took a shot at this, but it couldn't quite find it. Let me zoom in a bit so we can see how that date actually looks. So we can see it's 02/26/09. So didn't quite get it right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do something called banding here, rubber banding. I'm just going to click my mouse, drag it over the entire date, select it, and there we have it. Again, we have the snippet up top, and we have the value it found down below, which is great. We want to be able to put in our PO number. So again, I'll click on that field. I come over to my invoice on the left, click on where the PO number is, auto-select it, go through the rest of my fields here. I'm going to need an invoice total. If I scroll down a little bit here into the corner, I see my invoice total, $579.42. I just click on that. The other thing, I'm going to hit this little drop down you can see in my screen here, and I'm going to say yes, add a new fingerprint. So what I've been doing is I've clicked and selected these areas. I'm starting to find the fingerprint for all invoices that are coming from Busy Car Repair. And what this is telling the system is go ahead and add that to the database so that if I find a new invoices either in this batch, it can automatically start to pick out all these values for me. Or in the future, as any more invoices come in from Busy Car Repair, the system can automatically process them like we've seen with the previous invoices. So the last part of this invoice happens to be this line item data. So you can see we have a few lines in here, trucking ticket, KCL, and some fresh water. So I'm going to add the line data. So I'm going to click Insert to add a new line in here. First thing I'm going to do is click on the line item ID, and that's the first thing I'll do. Click on that. Next thing, I'll tell it where the description is. So again, I'm going to use this rubber banding where I can just drag over an area and tell it where that description is found. I'll go ahead and click on the quantity. I'll click on the price. And then finally, I will tell it where the line total is. Now, I don't have to go through and define every single line of this. I'm just going to define the first line item. I'll scroll to the top and I'll say find details. What that's going to go through is look at that invoice and automatically discover any more line items that are on there. So you can see it's automatically grabbed that second and third line item. Once I'm happy with that, I'll go ahead and submit that, and I'll move on to my next invoice. Well, next invoice comes in, and let me get a little better view of it so you can see the whole invoice on the left-hand side. It is a second invoice from Busy Car Repair. And you can see this one actually has another set of more line items than this one, but it's basically another invoice from the same vendor. Again, we didn't have a fingerprint when we first scanned this invoice, but I had just made one. And that's what this little message here, sticky available, is telling me. It said, you know what, when I first processed this, when I first scanned them in, I didn't know about Busy Car Repair, but now I do. So someone's defined it for me. So I'm going to click on this sticky button, and it will automatically process this entire invoice for me based on that definition I had just made previously. It looks like I didn't quite grab this area correctly, so what I can do again is just go ahead into this date, drag over this area, and it will update my fingerprint for me as we go along. And again, all of the rest of the information looks correct, so I can just click Submit. Oh, one thing, make sure I got the right vendor here. There we go, and click Submit. And finally, we come up with an invoice here from Stuart Apothecary, and let me fit this in. So in this particular invoice, it's actually a multi-page invoice. So you can see we have a whole large list item here of items. It actually goes on and continues on to a second page. One of the, again, real powerful things about Datacap is you can see that it's not quite sure about this arm calf. I'm going to click on that. You can see it's now flipped to the second page of that invoice, and it has that line item. I can validate, you know what, that is correct, and I'll go ahead and process this. So again, it handles multi-page invoices with many, many line items very well as well. So go ahead and submit this one. All documents are complete, finish batch. So as I click that Finish Batch button, what it's going to do is take all of these invoices that I just processed, and it's going to add them to our ECM repository, and that is going to be our SharePoint system. So let me minimize this screen. I'm going to open up another screen here, and we'll take a look at how these invoices are now going to look in the SharePoint system. I'm going to come up, and so what I have here now is a view of SharePoint, and this invoices happens to be a document library in our system. And what's going to happen is that these invoices are start to get loaded into the system. So you can see this new tag. I had an old one in here from XYZ Hardware, and you can see a new one has come in here. Now, some of the things that's happened that's really cool is it has automatically loaded all of that indexing information that we've defined during that Datacap process. So you can see, I can see the vendor ID, their zip, the invoice number, the PO number, the amount this particular invoice was for. All of this information is automatically captured into the system for us. And now that it's indexed, I can use searches in my SharePoint system. I can find all vendors from a particular, or all invoices from a particular vendor. I can search for a particular invoice number or a particular PO number to pull back any of that information. So that is great as well. What a lot of our other customers we help them with is linking back their accounts, their accounting system, so they can click right from their accounting system and access the invoices that have been stored inside of SharePoint. So I'm just going to refresh this, and you can see all of the rest of those invoices are now released and put into the system. So the next thing that happens is as these invoices are gone in, that's great, but we also have a workflow engine that's now going to route these documents for approval within our organization. So we can see in this case, this XYZ Hardware came into our system, and right now the in progress is an approval workflow to handle the processing of this XYZ Hardware. So workflow's gone off. It's run some rules. So it's actually looked into our accounting system to see who was responsible for this particular PO, and it's routed the workflow task for them to handle. And in this case, we've actually just sent out an email to our user to review this invoice and to either approve or reject it. So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to flip over to my mailbox. So I'm a user in my organization, and I got an approval for a PO to go ahead and work with one of our vendors to acquire some hardware. So what has come into my inbox is an email. It says, please review the attached invoice for approval. It could be the vendor name, the PO number, etc. As well as we look at the top here in the attachments area is the actual invoice itself attached right into this email. So I can click on this. What's going to happen is going to go back to the ECM system and pull up this invoice for me. I can review it. So I can say, yep, I ordered that HVAC stuff, the coupling, the diverter. I can see I got my discount that I was expecting. This looks really good. So right from within email, I can go ahead and approve this invoice. So I can click here. It's going to open up the approval step. So here I see a little form. And again, I can see the vendor ID, the vendor name, the zip code. I have a link back to the invoice if I want to look at it again. I see the invoice number, PO number, and then my decision here. So I can approve this particular invoice. I can reject it, in which case maybe there's a mistake or something that I wasn't happy with, or I can send it to accounting. So if there's something more complex and I wanted them to take a look at it, I can send it to them. All of these rules can be totally defined for your organization, all of the decisions, whatever we want to have here. I can put a comment in if I want, and when I'm done, I just go ahead and complete this task. And this is, it will go ahead and process this workflow, and it's now complete. And this concludes the demonstration portion of our software.
Unmuted.
Back over to Rob now to take any questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Darren. That was excellent. So a quick recap of what Darren just showed us. We saw faster processing of invoices with few errors through automatic recognition of and input of invoice data, automatic validation of that data versus an ERP or accounting system. We saw automation of the approval process. We saw automatic indexing into SharePoint. So note here that the greatest effort in the invoicing process can be saved by reducing the keying into systems, reducing the work due to errors in keying, etc., simplifying the approval process through doing automatic system checks, exception-only processing, and automated routing. We have better storage and less expensive storage and availability of invoices. It's all stored in the company's standard ECM, which in this case is SharePoint. It's easy to search. You can have multiple people viewing a single invoice at once. There's less photocopying, less stapling, less stamping. And there's fewer lost or missing invoices at the bottoms of desks or drawers and fewer filing cabinets storing that paper and costing lots of money. That concludes our webinar today. Thank you very much for attending. If you have any questions about the content presented today, please email info@rko-solutions.com and we will get back to you with answers. Thank you very much and have a great day.